The 80s, ruled by the guitar solo, dominated entirely by flash and technical prowess. It wasn't just part of the music, it was the music. The bands, everyone knew them, but it went deeper than that. Fans didn't just love the songs, they knew the guitarists. The players were branded, worshipped, merchandised. It seemed that every band just had a killer guitarist, and every kid wanted to be one.
So what happens when you have an era and industry that's ridiculously saturated with players like that? You get an iceberg of talent, and it runs deep.
Beneath the household names, you get the deep cuts. Guitarists whose bands might have not cracked the top 10, guitarists whose band's core hits didn't stand the test of time, guitarists you may have not even heard of.
And here we're going to start with one of my personal favorites. He's practically chairman of the board when it comes to criminally underrated players, Jake E. Lee.
This half-Japanese, half-American guitarist has had a hell of a resume. His time with Ozzy is the foundation setter for some of their most popular albums, his early work and associations with Rat, his own band Badlands, solo work, so on. I mean, that's enough to make most players retire very happy.
When Jake was on the come-up earlier in his career, Ozzy was hitting the huge rough patch that was the Randy Rhoads tragedy.
There were some very, very brief temporary guitar fill-ins for touring purposes after Randy's passing, but Bernie Tormé and Brad Gillis effectively wouldn't be the long-term answer for Ozzy Osbourne, stylistically speaking at least. Bottom line, Ozzy needed a new go-to guy, new writing, and a very strong follow-up to what was the Rhoads powerhouse era. Imagine being the dude that had to fill those shoes.
So along comes his fellow Jake, who actually beats out George Lynch for the gig, seamlessly transitions in, and arguably single-handedly resurrects Ozzy's solo career. He had his own standout identity, really solid stage presence, and could hit all of Randy Rhoads' parts without being a carbon copy. And naturally, of course, they did about 8 more records together, 10 more worldwide tours, and rode off into the sunset together.
Wrong. Jake got written out of history, literally. His name doesn't even appear in the Bark at the Moon credits. Why? When it came time to look into contracts as the album was progressing with production, he was pretty much strong-armed into signing his rights away. Otherwise, he'd allegedly be replaced and struck from the album. Wanting to keep his high-profile gig and not blow the opportunity, he gave his initials. Even so, he held his head high and wanted to continue proving himself.
I mean, you really can't blame the guy.
He stayed and then went on to help write the next album, The Ultimate Sin. He actually did get some formal writing credit for this one. Good job, Ozzy. And had another batch of amazing riffs and solos, of course. Despite really solid sales and successful touring, The Ultimate Sin was later disowned by Ozzy, who called it his least favorite album, something that really just further soured Jake on the whole experience. In '87, he was unceremoniously fired, allegedly learning about it from a fan who read it in a magazine. No call, no thanks. Imagine that. Newsprint doing its best HR impression, I guess.
I could probably spend the next 10 minutes or so rattling off everything Jake E. Lee brought to the table, but honestly, you just gotta hear it and see it.
Alright, this is a live go of Suicide Solution on the '84 tour. You know what's scary is this is likely improvised. This was not on the record. This guy could just whip out melodic lines like that at will. And if you're listening closely, the bass line just rides on that same note throughout. That is it. No disrespect to Bob Daisley, that's just how the song was. No complementary rhythm to layer over that extended solo then. He's pretty much by himself, no safety net. And this isn't just the intermission where the lead guitarist comes out and dive bombs for 3 minutes while the other guys swap gear.
What's cool with this passage is that he's thinking in phrases. Really tasteful arpeggio-like runs with some really big stretches. And it's really the Jake E. Lee special. He's pretty much just playing over air. And he just keeps going, pulling everything out of the arsenal while Ozzy kind of just stands around and claps, potentially unsure of where this tour stop location even is.
Yeah, he then seamlessly goes straight into this really cool combo harmonic minor Phrygian run thing, and then does one of his trademark crazy stretch licks. It's probably one of the most uncomfortable things you can possibly attempt on the guitar.
So Jakey Malmsteen here, just doing his own thing, driving it all himself. He occasionally works that stretch part into his solos as a fill, thumb acting as a capo and stretching over what seems like 20 frets. He was known for supplementing many of his licks with these unique chord voicings that created dissonance and then fell into a satisfying resolution.
And here's one more of Jake in 1986. For this one, I wanted to highlight some of his more unconventional techniques. It'll be clear here why he was such an avid Eddie Van Halen fan. Despite what kind of sounds he's producing, there's one thing that's very not 80s here. Can you tell? The dude has a hard-tailed fixed bridge. Why? Because Jake said so. He said, to hell with those floating trems. He said, I'm here, and I don't need to make it easy like the rest of y'all. He turned this whole thing into a calling card, practically. Strategically bending the neck, string depression behind the nut, full-body guitar yoga. Anything and everything to simulate that whammy bar effect. And he used it a lot.
That's like ordering a coffee, but you're only paying if the beans are crushed between bare hands.
This is one of Jake's signature guitars, the same one you saw in that last live video. His go-tos were Charvel and ESP primarily. And from afar, this looks like that typical Super Strat, but when looking closely, you can see, one, that hardtail I mentioned, as well as a pretty unique pickup configuration. His middle and neck pickups are slanted, which gives a bit more attack to the sound, but another cool note on that is that it was modeled after Hendrix's flipped-over right-handed Strat, because he was such a major fan. And that color, the blue, looks like the default Microsoft Paint blue, and I think it was intentional. Again, workhorse. No fancy graphics, no bells, no whistles. I also absolutely love guitars with the single volume knob. Simply another workhorse characteristic. No one needs tone. That comes from being Jake E. Lee. As for his amp, he mainly drove a Marshall 100-watt Super Lead, as did many others at the time, but he was one of the really lucky few to get that special Jose mod, the one with the extra volume knob so you could crank the preamp without going entirely deaf. With that kind of setup, you do not need a pedal board. Being the purist that Jake was, the only really notable and minor addition to his sound was a little bit of chorus, which I believe was just from a regular Boss pedal. And to get his cleans, he just dialed back the volume knob on the guitar. Also, can't forget to mention that he has his own signature Friedman amp, which is pretty sweet and a really cool color.
All in all, he was a purist minimalist, which tracks considering he genuinely thought battery-powered pedals sounded better than anything going into a wall. Not an outlet guy.
Alright, let's now take a quick look at some snippets of the guitar stem of what I think is his most complex and melodic solo. And nope, it's not Bark at the Moon. That one's an easy top 5 solo for me, but this one in Center of Eternity is just nuts. He pulls out all the stops here. Yeah, I had to listen to this ascending piece in particular time after time at like 15% speed just to figure out what was even going on. You know, where it sounds like a Gregorian chant in a cave. He does these weird, chaotic kind of jumps in his runs that sound like they shouldn't make sense, but they come together so well. He then ends with a very fitting, dramatic 80s deep vibrato bend. Let's now take a look at an interesting piece in the middle section. And here we really see Jake's melodic and pseudo-classical techniques shine. Is this legato-type climb he whipped together, again, just over a very minimal rhythm track. It gives a lot of story to the solo. And now let's do one more cool highlight here. Yeah, this one's another head scratcher, and I don't think any of the tabs out there are right for this entire solo for that matter. A lot of what I saw had you jumping all over the fretboard, which just doesn't make sense orientation-wise, especially at this kind of breakneck speed. And that delayed ring out of the last note is just perfection. It's basically saying, yeah, you just heard all that.
let's give the full thing a shot. And just like that, the 82 to 87 era ended as abruptly as it began. Just take a second to consider the amount of pressure that this guy was under in Ozzy. With that in mind, Jake came in with zero hesitation, delivered, and demolished. Spearheaded Bark at the Moon, hit gold and triple platinum. Signed his rights away, still remaining loyal and having an undying love for the game. The Ultimate Sin, eventually double platinum. Perfect renditions of old material, flawlessly executed, but with a twist. As he exited the mainstream conversation, Jake didn't disappear. He kept playing, writing, touring, killing it. He made Badlands, which, if the world had been paying attention, could have changed the course of late 80s rock. And even now, decades later, he's still out there with Red Dragon Cartel, still bending necks instead of whammy bars. So I highly recommend checking out more of Jake's work. I've linked some really worthwhile gems below. So yeah, you probably know Eddie. You definitely know Randy, but it's time you really knew Jake.